Here to introduce our keynote this morning is Dr. Tom Rondo. He is the director for FutureG efforts within the DoD. And so he has been a good friend of GNU Radio for a long time. We always appreciate when he takes time out of his busy travel schedule to come be with us. He's also the best dressed guy at the conference, no offense to anybody. He ran the GNU Radio project a long time ago and has kind of worked his way up to affect the nation's view on communications. And I think every time that I listen to him, I always walk away with a renewed sense of optimism about where our country's heading in terms of the electromagnetic spectrum and use of that for defense of the country. So welcome, Dr. Rondo. His list of accomplishments are too numerous to list, but we welcome him here for his keynote this morning. Thanks, Tom.
All right, thanks everybody. Let's see, this seemed like it was going forward on its own. Let's see if it works. So good morning, everybody. Really happy to be here. So Tom Rondo, I'm the principal director of what we call FutureG, our Future Generation Wireless Technologies. It is a technology area under the Office of the Secretary of Defense, or excuse me, Secretary of War for Research and Engineering. So I am basically the senior leader at the Pentagon for anything dealing with research in 5G advanced technologies, how to integrate those technologies into our DoD platforms and capabilities. But a lot of it is, we called it FutureG because we didn't want to be stopped at what is 5G, what is 6G, what's coming next. We just wanted to keep our eyes set on the future. So we called it that. The name seems to be sticking, and we've got a lot of interesting work going on helping us prepare the nation for what's coming next and how we can utilize these technology areas most effectively. So fundamentally, I look at my role in kind of two different large buckets, which is the kind of standard national security of the United States and how we use these technologies for those purposes. But there's also the national economic security of this. And so as we're tying into commercial industry and the commercial sector for pulling technology into the department, we're also trying to make sure that we're providing some leadership and some vision, some guidance to industry to generate new needs and new drivers for their investments in this technology area. So we're looking, like I said, at 6G, which is being defined as we speak. They're having the 3GPP meetings regularly. March kicked off kind of the first sessions on defining what's going to become 6G. And so those work products and studies and everything are happening right now. And we're trying to make sure that we're on top of it, we understand what's going on there, and as much as we can help influence the use of this technology and the growth of it. So our mission here is to figure out how to ingest and work with commercial cellular, mostly industry, although wireless in general, we really are kind of focused a lot on the cellular industry, partly because of their focus on security, renewed or increased focus on security, the mobility aspect of it, and all the other kind of features that come with the growing technology areas. So as you move into what 5G standalone architectures, you get a lot of benefits from that we find beneficial from the military perspective. So each one of our platforms kind of traditionally has had dedicated data links, or we've defined specialized data links and wireless technologies for each problem set that we have. The benefit of what's going on in 5G is the softwareization of the industry and the use of that softwareization to then program and reallocate resources effectively or more effectively to those different purposes. The metaphor that I've used is if you think about what 4G was a brilliant technology that made a lot of stuff work for us. Our phones, everything, I mean, it's a lot of data. It's really good for the purpose that it was designed for. But it's a massive highway of data. So, and it's not very malleable or adaptable to different problem sets. It really is like, so let's see, I usually use the metaphor of I-95 back in DC, but it's like, this is like I-5 in the West Coast, where so much traffic goes up and down there, and it's incredibly useful. But what if you had to drive I-5 to the grocery store or to your, instead of your driveway or, the state roads? They're all just that big structure. But 5G allowed us to adapt those and create side roads, create local roads, create driveways, and so on, so that you can actually utilize the resources more effectively for what you want them for. So that comes into how we engage with industry and how we work with these new technologies. And so going back to that softwareization, right, that's kind of what we're all here because of software-defined radio. Software-defined networking is a huge part of the 5G work. And that was the transition. So if you think about the different generations of technologies that have gone in the cellular industry for the past 40 years at this point, each one had a specific goal in mind, right? The first generation was just getting just cell phone in your hand, does voice comms work in a mobile scenario, and we proved that out. And as I always like to joke, nobody ever predicted the killer app of any given generation of technologies. So, 1G or AMPS was, okay, is there a market for this? It proved that out, and sure there is, but the killer app of 1G was really drug dealers. The ability to spoof phone numbers to obfuscate your position and let the other poor guy get arrested. So that led the industry to say, okay, well, security is probably important. So 2G added a lot of security features to it with the SIM card, right, and how using that for access, security, authentication, and importantly, billing. So this is a market driver for the industry, is how do we bill people effectively, and the right person using their network is getting billed appropriately for their use of that network. 2G's killer app was supposed to be that kind of global mobile network construct, and turned out the killer app of 2G was SMS, text messaging. And so that kind of led everybody to think, oh, great, that's awesome. We can do text messaging. What if we could do data? So 3G was that transition from thinking about it as just a voice network to a data network. Now, the killer app of 3G turned out to be the iPhone, because the iPhone literally killed the 3G network. There was too much data, it couldn't handle it. And so they decided they kind of evolved that into what became 4G or LTE. That is, as I mentioned, this really great platform for broadband data to the phone. Now, the killer app of 4G turned out to be like the App Store. And that's, again, that kind of change in mindset of like, oh, now I can actually build apps, and I have a platform and a network that can utilize that software, and I can start building new industries off of that, right? Ubers and TikToks and all of that stuff came about because we had that ubiquitous, high-quality, resilient 4G network. That motivation into 5G was then, okay, well, if we can do that, now we need to be able to monetize new parts of that network for more purposes. And so this softwareization of 5G comes about. Now, I think a lot of us have been fairly disappointed in where 5G has come. I think we're starting to see more sprouts of hope out there as far as the use of these technologies, where people are starting to utilize them for more niche challenges, more private networks that are launching off of the 5G network. But transforming an industry that had decades of experience building hardware and building big boxes that managed millions of connections and communications every day to a software function behind everything, that's where the industry has been coming up over the past 5+ years in order to figure out how to utilize that. So when we think about 6G, what's the distinction between 5G and 6G? Really what happened is every one of these generations, there was kind of I'm going to use the word TikTok, not TikTok TM, but a model of let's go into a market, let's figure that out, and then the even generations kind of come out and smooth that out and build a good business practice on there. But it also was just representing a change in industry in the marketplace for how we can adopt technology effectively and use it for new business cases. And that's where we see 6G going, if 5G was a softwareization of the telecommunications industry itself, this is how do we take that and make the best use cases out of it. And again, that's where we got excited within the department to figure out how to utilize this technology for our purposes. So up here, we have this mission of adopt, adapt, and advance. So when we can, we like to just pull commercial off-the-shelf technologies into our use cases. It's a more scalable solution, it's a more cost-effective solution, and it is using the market drivers to continue the supply chain and the cost and efficiencies of those technologies that we can then use. But then we need to adapt it often to our specific use cases, harden it, add security features to it, figure out how to integrate it into our systems. And then the final one, advance, is how do we then take these ideas and help advance commercial industry and provide that vision for where this technology could go so we can give them drivers for how to think about using this technology. And so we've got this list of different drivers for commercial industry and for the defense industry, so that we can, again, figure out how we work together and provide that motivation. We can provide both the ideas, we can generate the strategies for the department for how we're going to ingest this, where we're going to put it inside the department, but also figure out how to use that as kind of dual use technologies to drive that vision of the future. So there's a lot of key capabilities here that are coming because of this merge and the building of a healthier relationship between the Classic Defense Department, where we have our defense industry base, which I know a lot of people here represent, but then there's that commercial base, and how we're merging those together has been one of the successful aspects of what our office has been doing. So I get to travel all around the world, having these conversations, talking to industry, talking to governments, and working together to form partnerships and alliances across the globe for the benefit of both this commercial industry and our defense industry. So that's the kind of the point of the office, and what we're here for is to drive that vision forward and make sure that it gets integrated into our systems. When I started off this job, when we started kind of thinking about this when I was back at DARPA, looking at it from, again, how do we think about defense or warfighting capabilities? And we used to get a lot of pushback in the Pentagon across the services of, would we ever send our warfighters downrange with a cell phone in their hand? No, we would never do that. We need specialized tactical radios, and only if they're big bricks that they can hit somebody over the head with will they be useful for us. And I would look at them and I was like, it's too late. These guys are already taking their phones down with them. Let's figure out how to make it more useful and more secure and safer for them to use. Today, the services have adopted this perspective. They understand that it's the value of it happening. We're watching closely what's going on in the war in Ukraine right now, and the use of those cellular technologies and what they can do for them. And frankly, the more effective security that it's providing them versus specialized tactical radios, where everybody knows what channels you're using, everybody knows those waveforms, and now they're just become targets. Whereas if you use these technologies, it's much easier to roll new ideas, new features, but you're also part of the more kind of global network and information infrastructure that's proving much more useful. So the department's woken up. It's a much easier conversation to have, and now it's my job to help guide the vision of how these technologies all meet our needs here. And so from that perspective, we created an office that has these 5 lines of effort. We used to have, in the 5G world, it was really the dual use technologies and then the operate through mentality. I looked at this more from an operational perspective of how do we make sure that these technologies are integrating more effectively with our operational needs. And so we have the resilient open commercial solutions. I'm going to be talking a lot more about this one in particular, because this was our growth from just dual use to thinking about it from how do we engage that commercial industry, but push them towards these more open solutions, because open architectures, if you've ever heard of ORAN, or Open Radio Access Networks, I know I'm speaking to a radio crowd here, but if you're not familiar with the jargon of like 3GPP, the radio access network, or the RAN, is effectively the base station that you're communicating with every time you use a cell phone on one of these networks. That represents about 80% of the cost and complexity of a cellular network. And that cost and complexity is driven by 5 companies. You got your Ericsson, Nokia, Samsung. Those are the 3 that we're allowed to work with, because the other 2, ZTE, and of course the H word, Huawei. So trying to figure out how to work with an industry that has that much consolidation into a few big and powerful and innovative companies. I'm not going to disparage them for their innovation, but they kind of control the speed of innovation in the market, the rollout of these technologies, and then to work with them to actually do any of these new features that are now software programmable in the network becomes very hard, because they've captured that space there. By creating an open architecture, you're breaking open those black boxes, disaggregating them into different functional areas, and now you're allowing people to innovate at different levels of that RAN architecture. Well, we don't just stop at the open architecture. We're going to talk more later in this talk about our open source software push, because that's the next level of insights and control and programmability of these systems, is if you break that open. So that's a lot of what our ROCs line of effort goes into. Our ubiquitous, secure, and instant access. This one is almost a no-brainer. You know, ubiquitous connectivity is the goal of a lot of the wireless engineers. So wherever you are in the world, can we get access to the information infrastructure? We've added that secure and instant because speed and validity of information to decision makers to make the right decision to prosecute the next course of action is incredibly important to our military activities as we operate as a global force. So we're thinking about this in terms of how do we make sure that in the most austere environments where there's very little infrastructure, or in the middle of the ocean where there's almost no infrastructure, how do we ensure access to this? So a lot of the work that's been done here is how do we engage with commercial mobile network operators around the world to build relationships with them, to increase our security and our risk and reduce our risk profile of using their infrastructure for our purposes. But it also is the other jargony word in the 5G, 6G world is NTN, non-terrestrial networks. So traditionally we're thinking about this in terms of SATCOM. So all those proliferated LEO constellations that are going up is part of that NTN layer, but it's only one part. Non-terrestrial just means you're not just a terrestrial-based tower. So we're looking at this in terms of how do you outfit UAVs or flying platforms with 5G, 6G connectivity, high altitude platforms, balloons, stratospheric vehicles to be able to carry these types of capabilities forward and fill those coverage gaps when we need them. So that's all part of that USIA line of effort. Expeditionary and tactical use, we are representing the Defense Department, so we have to engage in conflict, and when we do, they become very contested and congested environments. You've got a lot of electronic warfare out there. Electronic warfare is no longer a niche capability of a military force these days. It is the reality of operating in any contested environment. And so how do we engage that with commercial technologies that are not built for that kind of jamming? If you look at the mathematics of jamming versus interference, looks relatively the same. But in practice, with the variations of power and the intent of jammers, changes the calculus on that quite a bit. And so can we make sure that these systems are robust against that? Or, if we need to, can we pop off of these commercial stacks into more tactically relevant capabilities that are more survivable in those contested electronic warfare dense environments? So we've been studying the RF signatures, the profiles, and how we actually can use the software functions of a core network to communicate and seamlessly interoperate with other tactical radios or other tactical networks that we may deploy. A big part of this one has been our work with NATO. And NATO is 32 nations, each one having their own say in what happens in NATO in a joint force operation. So we've been using this to enable the idea of everybody can bring their own technologies, their own security features, their own authentication stance, and seamlessly work together with a well-crafted network architecture. We also have our Agile Spectrum Operations line of effort. This one is a new one this year. It used to be part of our ROCs portfolio, but with the increased importance of spectrum and the discussions of spectrum from a commercial and defense standpoint that happened this year, we split it out into its own line of effort to really focus some of our projects on in that area. If you've been following kind of the business and the politics of this, earlier this year, the White House demanded that the Defense Department give up 600 megahertz of its mid-band spectrum. So roughly, 1 to 2 gigahertz, all the way up to 6 gigahertz, more or less, as defined, ill-defined as mid-bands. But a lot of the mid-band spectrum in the 2 gigahertz and 3 gigahertz region has been incredibly useful for commercial activities. And so a lot of the high bandwidth capabilities that your 5G systems use today operate on that mid-band spectrum. So industry said we need more of that. They always need more spectrum. And they came to the Department of Defense because we own, in the US, we own a lot of access to those mid-band frequencies. So that was a really interesting struggle with industry from the defense side to protect our assets and the use of that spectrum for specific DoD purposes, a lot of sensing capabilities that we have out there. And so it came to our chief information officer. They're the ones that run spectrum for the Pentagon. But they brought us in from the R&E perspective as the technical experts on what are the new things we can do here. And one of the interesting things and changes that you might have seen in the Pentagon is when they brought in Steve Feinberg as our Deputy Secretary of Defense. He's a private equity guy. He's a business guy. Brought him in as our Deputy Secretary of Defense, and he and I worked closely together on kind of crafting our message and our work with the Department of Commerce and commercial industry to say there's a benefit to the department if commercial industry is successful. So all this work about using commercial technologies actually is increased if commercial industry is successful and has access to the spectrum in many cases with specific carve-outs when we very specifically need a dedicated solution to the use of that spectrum. That turned into what was announced in the National Spectrum Strategy from a couple years ago. They called it the moonshot. If you're a policy wonk and read that document, that turned into what we now call advanced spectrum coexistence. You may have seen the announcement on Advanced Dynamic Spectrum Sharing Demonstration. We now call that ASC, Advanced Spectrum Coexistence Demonstration. The execution of that prototyping and demonstration of technologies is operated out of my office. So we should be announcing the selected performers on that ASC demo possibly within days to weeks about who we're working with to build up the most advanced and large-scale technologies to change the way that we think about spectrum sharing in a dynamic and congested environment. We're actually operating this in the lower 3 gigahertz band, where we have a lot of Navy, Air Force, and Army sensing platforms that are highly tuned to their job, but didn't kind of predict an environment that has thousands of these things operating in that spectrum right around it. So can we figure out a way to actually share that spectrum effectively? We think this is going to be a game changer in the future of how we think about this dichotomy of defense versus commercial use of spectrum. I'm excited to be able to allow industry to grow, to innovate, to drive forward through the lens of this has business value, which means revenue streams, but we can still use it for defense purposes, or we can buy services back from industry. It's also designed to make us more survivable around the world. It's one thing to work with US industry on US soil for sharing that spectrum, but can we utilize techniques like this to make us more agile and more maneuverable in the spectrum as we operate around the globe? Finally, and I'm going to get into this a lot more, is our integrated sensing and communications. This is turning our networks into sensors. So there's a lot of information that you can get from the environments by looking at all of these signals that are bouncing around us all the time. And what we normally do as communications engineers is we want to take away as much of that noise, as much of the excess information in there, to just distill it down to the bits of data that we need to make sense of. But we've been throwing away a lot of information. Well, with advancements in microelectronics, advancements in spectrum access, it's giving us a lot more opportunity to make sense of our world around us if we can integrate those functions together, which has a lot of benefits to us that I'll speak to more later. And then finally, we have these cross-cutting topics where standards are a big deal for us. We don't have a large indigenous US industry in the radio access network world. We lost a lot of those capabilities over consolidation of the market over the past 20 years. China and Huawei have really dominated that space recently. And so how do we actually make sure that our interests and our industries are getting supported in the standards process? This is across all of our lines of effort, but it's also across the interagency. So we work very closely with our Department of Commerce, Department of State, NSF, Department of Homeland Security. We all, NIST, we all have an interest in this space and want to drive it forward in a way that's beneficial to us. Workforce development. For those of you who know my history with DARPA, we created some really cool technology, some of the most advanced RF technologies in the world that no one knew how to use. So yes, we proved something, but can we actually get it out there and scale to the field? Can we actually think about spectrum sharing in contested environments if our operators don't understand that they're operating in this maneuver space of spectrum. So we need to train both within the DoD, our military, our civilians, but also working across US industry to ensure that we're communicating together and we're building the next generation of wireless users, network architects, engineers, and the PhDs that are going to define the future of this technology area. And then finally, security. Again, I mentioned 5G is the most secure cellular technology to date. They've focused a lot more on security in that, and they're continuing that push in 6G. But the security concerns of the industry are still different than the security concerns of running as a national defense organization. And so we need to be pushing on that or figuring out how to integrate our own security features to enhance the security of these systems against our adversaries. So, moving on from the large perspective of the office into a couple of very specific topics that I wanted to get into this morning. The first one is what we call OCUDU. So within this Open RAN construct, they've separated some of the functions into a centralized unit, and then as part of the RAN stack, and then the distributed units, which then talk to the radio units. So putting this together by opening up just that centralized unit and distributed unit into an open source software project. That was a long process of us looking into the industry, trying to figure out where they're going. How does Open RAN already affect our ability to work within this construct? And realizing that most companies that we work with are limited because they have to maintain their own CU/DU software stack themselves. Many of them have brought in, they bought commercial products, and then it takes them a while to integrate that or use it or figure out how to work with it. And then often they then build their own internal stack. And this is like everybody in the early days of computing, where we had to build a special purpose operating system for every single new computer that you pushed out there. That went away when Linux hit, and that kind of commoditized. It looked at that operating system layer as a commoditized layer, and we can now then operate on multiple different types of hardware simultaneously. We can expose different parts of that to the tech innovators out there and the entrepreneurs to figure out how to utilize this. We did an analysis. This is probably 6-7 years ago now, so it's probably slightly aged. But at the time, we looked at the Linux stack as an operating system and all the open source tools that sit on top of the Linux stack, and then the users of that stack, like Facebook. So hundreds of billions of dollars of company is sitting on about $14 billion of investment in the open source stack that then is part of the competitive space that they got into. So we're no longer competing on the operating system layer, we're competing on the use of those operating systems. That's what we looked at for OCUDU. We want to make that same level of change in telecommunications industry by saying, stop caring about your own stack. You want to innovate on things that are important, like the underlying hardware that's going to execute this in a more cost-effective or energy-efficient manner, or you want to innovate on the application space to utilize that stack in new ways, like this integrated sensing and communications that I talked about. How are you going to make use of this data? How are you going to get access to the data in ways that's going to tell us what's happening in the world around us if we don't have the ability to, or if we're struggling just to maintain our own internal stack? So through that calculus, we decided that this was the right layer, this is the right piece of that puzzle that we needed to open source in order to jointly work as a global community and develop that ecosystem around that portion to enable the rest of this innovation cycle that we're really excited to see happen. So we had an RFI out last year, helped to kind of learn from industry what features are important, what metrics we wanted to attain when it came to building something like OCUDU. Then we had an industry day to work with industry and announce what we were planning to do. We came out with this RPP, request for prototype proposal. That came out at the end of May, closed within early July, did our evaluation, so we did a proper source selection process, got a lot of interest from the industry on variations on this theme for how they were going to solve this OCUDU problem, and we were able to get through that in rapid time to come to a source selection decision. And so the award is happening as we speak. So I can't, unfortunately, announce the winner of that award, but we will be coming out within a week, probably more like 2 weeks, you'll know who is who will be the winner of that of this Okudu Award and who's going to drive that technology area forward for us in coordination with us in the Defense Department. But we've also made good ties again across the interagency, DHS, NSF, Department of Transportation, and Department of Commerce. All have an interest in this, and we're working closely with the Linux Foundation. So as we move on to, well, I'll talk about that more in a second. I do want to get through some of these bullet points real fast. But we will be working with the Linux Foundation and make it a premier project from the Linux Foundation to push this and develop that global ecosystem of users of this new 5G, 6G ready stack. But why did we do this? I already mentioned kind of that commoditized layer there, but there's other benefits that we wanted to get out of this. And now I'm talking to an open source crowd here, so I don't really need to sell you on the value of open source, I don't think. But we did look at this from all of the feature sets that we wanted to see here. Security is a big one, and this is one of those things where you have a lot of FUD, or fear, uncertainty, and doubt within a lot of areas within the DoD or within the US government. Thinking about, oh, it's open source, oh, it's not secure, oh, it's just, kids hacking around in it and there's no professional, basis behind it. And we have to keep telling them that if you really look at where industry has gone, 80% of all code these days is open source. 80% of any project is based on open source code underneath it. Industry has adopted this. They've understood the value of this, and they've also built their security mechanisms around it. So generating things like DevOps, right? It was, the open source community kind of invented that out of necessity of working in a distributed global kind of connected community of users and developers in order to address these needs of figuring out code quality, management, patching, rolling out of bug fixes and so on. So it actually lends itself to a more secure system if you do the architecture and you create the management structure appropriately behind it. And that's one of the things that we were keyed in on when we announced the request for proposals for Okudu, is you have to show us a clean stack that can be secured, all the tools, all the open source software, or sorry, open source security foundation concepts can be built around this in order to enhance the security. That leads to resiliency, it leads to more ubiquitous deployments of these systems and rapid adoption and again, bug fixes as they're discovered. We always get that call as well as, well, how are you gonna make sure that these systems are secure, that there's no bugs in it? And then I have to try to figure out how to explain to a 4-star general the halting problem, that nothing can ever be proven to be secure. The value here is in the rapid response time that we can generate into fixing those bugs when they're discovered. So don't think about solving security, think about addressing security and ensuring that it's a big part of this. I already mentioned the transparency is key for us, and then AI-driven. I wanted to stomp on that topic for a second, right? It's the word du jour, or for past few years. AI is going to be a huge part of the future of telecommunications industry. These are becoming incredibly complex networks that are operating at scales and at speeds that are well beyond human engineers can do in real time. We're going to need to integrate AI capabilities and concepts into these networks in order to manage them and handle them. And again, how are you going to do that unless you actually can understand the code, can tap into in places to understand the value proposition here of using AI, or when things go wrong, we need to be able to understand the guts of this in order to be able to fix it. So all those come together to create this base that we're calling Okudu. So the time period of the execution of the project, we will again be able to announce it and get started on it within weeks as we get through the agreements processing with our contracting office. That's going to go into a quick turn development of the initial kind of minimum viable products of Okudu, and by summer of next year, we're looking to release that to the Linux Foundation so that it becomes a truly open source project that people can then start to work off of. After that, we need to build up the commercial viability of this software stack, because this is not going to be something that the DoD is going to sustain long term, right? That's not our interest. It's not to the benefit of really anybody for it to come from a single source of funding and a single driver of the technology. This should be driven by commercial interests eventually. We've heard from the commercial industry that they want something like this. Every time you talk to one of them, they would love to have access to a thing like Okudu, but it's too risky for any one of them to try to drive it forward initially. But that's where we come in. We're offsetting that risk effectively by putting in the U.S. money into building this thing up, and using this time period of where our funding is going to come from in order to drive interest from commercial industry, with the intention that by the time we're done in around the fiscal year 2029 for full commercial adoption. Now, it's not going to mean that the department is going to exit from leadership or funding of efforts here. It's just we're not going to be the sole funding source for all of this. But as far as driving features, driving fixes, driving integration into defense capabilities, all that's going to come as part of the continuing future of our engagement with this group. So we're really excited about this one and hope that this integrates well with the rest of the open source software defined radio community as building on your expertise, helping drive new visions of innovation. So as we're thinking about new ways of accessing the spectrum, driving future standards of waveforms, of signal analysis, of sensing capabilities. Those are all the things that this community has built up an expertise on. We have the tools in GNU Radio to be able to do that kind of analysis, quick turn of innovative ideas, and in a way that's much more adaptable and malleable for us to explore ideas and then use that as a way to drive integration into the future tech stack and then use that to drive future standards. So that's part of the play here, is that currently 3GPP is the tech setting body for the wireless industry. It sets a standard, but really nobody moves on the technology until the standard's out there. So how do you drive the standard in a way that is beneficial to our interests and new ideas that we can generate within this community here if you're not able to work on it? So we're hoping to start to change that motivation of leading with innovation, leading with technology, and then in a programmable sense, as we deploy these technologies in the field, we can start having that kind of adaptability and flexibility on the software level that can then drive and lead towards the ubiquitous standard that we're all going to rely on for that true kind of market penetration and capability. So that's the Okudu story, and I think this is a great community to help us work with it, generate ideas, analyze it, do the kind of security analysis of the systems, do the kind of penetration testing as well of the system from all of you out there. All right, so I also mentioned Isaac. Some people call it Isaac. I call it Isaac. Just rolls off the tongue in my mind better. Integrated sensing and communications. I already talked, kind of mentioned the principles of this, which is there's a lot of information as these signals are bouncing around the environments. How do we make use of that? Now, this is a really cool idea for multiple reasons. We can then use it for defensive purposes, critical infrastructure protection. One of the key drivers, use cases, I should say, of Isaac in industry is counter-drone. So as we're all looking at the future of drone warfare, but also commercial uses of drones, as we're delivering packages and medical equipment and devices and goods to the field, we need to define rules of engagement, and then we need to monitor the execution of those rules of engagement and figure out what's happening. Do we want to build a secondary specialized network just to do that sensing? Or do we want to make use of technology that's already being rolled out for other purposes and add on to that feature capabilities of sensing? It also helps us with that concept of spectrum. If I'm using spectrum for one thing dedicated to a sensing mission over here, and I can't use that for communications, or can I use it for the same thing simultaneously and offset some of that burden of our mission sets as a way to provide more eyes and ears around the world? So there's a lot of possibilities in this Isaac concept that we're looking to take advantage of. As you can see here, we're looking at monostatic, so this is just a classic. I emit from the base station some energy, the energy is going to bounce around, it's going to come back, and my base station is also a receiver. Can I do that with a classic radar function we call monostatic because it's the same, it's coming from the same tower as transmit and receive. There's been a lot of work done to date on how do we utilize existing 5G signals for this purpose. And we have actually, we're working with a company called Tiami. They're actually doing this for drone detection, and we're pushing that concept forward. But then there's the model where you have a densification of the network. So you have these base stations everywhere around environments, more density in urban environments, but it's still like, every few square kilometers there's a base station within this country for the most part where there's any population density, you're gonna find these systems. So now as we're emitting from one tower and it's bouncing around, there's another tower that's in the next cell over that's using those same frequencies. Maybe we can actually listen to it from there, and now we can extend the range or the reach of our network or just the operational capabilities of that network for multiple different sensing kind of concepts. And then there's just this passive coherent localization, which is, again, lots of energy out there. Maybe have a secondary receiver that's highly tuned just to do the sensing portion of this and pull that in and use it from a kind of a sidecar type model for advanced features or for novel things that are not going to be necessarily integrated with a commercial network. So lots of opportunities here for innovation. Now I'll tell the one fun story about when I talked to Tiami initially a couple of years ago. We first found them and we're like, this is really cool. What frequency, what cell phone channel are you utilizing for your sensing modality? And they said to me, I'm not sure, it really doesn't matter. I was like, I think the radar equation tells you that it matters. But they were just like, no, we just throw it into an AI engine and it figures out what to do. And I scratched my head and I was like, maybe they're right. Maybe we don't need to figure out this stuff out. But really, I think what I'm excited about is a lot of people picking up their old radar theory books, mixing it with the novel AI approaches to this, merging those concepts together and creating novel ways to prosecute this opportunity. Another aspect of this that we're excited about is not just like the physical object detection, identification, localization, but you can also learn a lot about your environment from these signals. So there's a handful of companies out there already that are thinking about things like weather, discovering weather information. Talking to folks who are weather radar researchers are excited about this because normally our weather radars are really big, metal boxes of antennas. Some of the novel digital phased array antennas that are coming out were designed for weather research and weather radar purposes. But those are gigantic, large amount of energy, focused on a specific spectrum, and they broadcast usually up and out. But a lot of things like tornado formation, it's actually the lower couple hundred feet that really matter. And if you can understand what's happening in the air, the moisture, the weather conditions in that area, you can actually do better prediction of when and where a tornado may actually develop because of that knowledge. Building that into our sensing networks that are also our communications networks provides opportunities and quick time reaction because you're fusing those concepts together. Another company that we saw in Barcelona last year was looking at flood detection. So after a flood, there's going to be structural damage or environmental wear and tear that may not be obvious to to visual inspection, but using these signals of opportunity, you can actually learn more about what's happening after the fact. A lot of great benefits that could come from this. On the flip side, this will now be a commercialized technology and it'll be out there for everybody to utilize and use. And now what does that mean for our own personal liberties? If this is a passive radar system that's detecting our movements, I know our phones are tracked all the time, but what if you put your phone down and you want to be a person that doesn't have a signature? Well, too bad. You're now part of the sensing network because you're part of the world that these signals are bouncing around on. We've actually seen evidence, this has been for a while now, about 10 years plus, that there's been papers published and demos on using Wi-Fi technology to detect biometrics, your heart rate, your breathing rate. Can we turn that into emotional states? All of this has benefit to us and the U.S. has entrusted us to utilize these technologies effectively as a national defense force. But if now it's just part of the network, how do we protect, how do we ensure that there's protection of this data and protection of your information? This does have relevance to the Department of Defense perspective on our operational outreach and what it's going to mean against our ability to manage that space. So there's an adversarial aspect to ISAC as well. So how do we use ISAC? How do we defend against it when it's being used against us? A lot of cool ideas there. So finish up my last slide here. We did a number of steps to get to where our understanding of what ISAC looks like. It culminated a few weeks ago, mid-August, with our ISAC Strategy Summit, where we brought together a large community of academics, industry, defense industry, the service representatives, to better understand where are we going to go with this? How do we actually do this as a national imperative to take advantage of this opportunity? Because I do believe that this is one of those key drivers of future technologies that can be brought from this. A lot of the cyber-physical interface that's going to come in 6G is because of this ability to learn what's around us and develop new ideas for how to use this technology. So we brought together some of the biggest minds we could find into the Strategy Summit. That's me up there next to Martin Weiss, who is my Director of Applied Research, who's actually running all this effort for me. On the far side is my Deputy Director, Marlon Macklin. But in the middle there is Olivia Trusty, one of the FCC commissioners. She came and spoke and again talked about it as a national goal of being able to lead in this space. And next to her is Steve Lang, Ambassador Lang from the State Department, who led our last World Radio Conference organization and was the voice of spectrum policy for the US for the past few years. So getting them to talk and work with the rest of industry to kind of lead and drive this vision forward. What we came out of that with was I went to that ISAC Strategy Summit saying, this really, while it has an importance to the department, we really shouldn't be leading it because we're never going to define that killer use case to drive industry to think about how do we make money off of this technology. I wanted industry to be there to say, these are our good ideas for how we're going to utilize this. Well, industry came expecting me to tell them what their killer use case was. And so we kind of came to this head where we realized, okay, what we can do and I just realized I'm wearing the exact same outfit. So this could have happened this morning. So what we can do from the government perspective is invest in a national security driver for ISAC that can help offset the investment and the risk in outfitting across the United States the infrastructure for ISAC work to happen. So we can create a case, for instance, counter-drone, critical infrastructure defense against drones and drone swarms, border protections, things like that can be done in a much more effective way if you're building it into your network. So we came out of this by saying, okay, well, we will actually have to lead with that national security driver for this and help industry make sure that we're investing appropriately with them, that we give them both the infrastructure, but also the open interfaces, architectures, data structures that can be utilized effectively for people to say, aha, I have a new idea for how to use this data and start going after different applications. And we had John Spiritos, who is an investor. He came to speak with us at the summit to kind of give the idea that, and in his words, shots on goal. That's what venture capital, that's what investors look for. The number of shots on goal, and eventually one of them is going to hit. And so we want to make sure that we're building this infrastructure so that we can generate more shots on goal from different entrepreneurs and innovators to figure out which one of those are going to hit. So that's our role in ISAC. And so going forward, we will be coming up with an investment strategy, solicitations, probably some more workshops and RFIs out to industry as we're building up with the money that we're getting from Congress starting in FY27, and a lot of that will go into investing into this space of ISAC. So there will be plenty of opportunities for research, for funded projects coming out of my office to help us get after this problem. So look forward to that over the next year as we kind of build up towards that. And with that, I will stop and thank you all for your attention. So, Josh, I think I pushed us right up into time, but if we have time for questions.
Yeah, we definitely will make time for a few questions here. So, Steve.
You touched on workforce development, and in my mind, where I live in amateur radio, here is a cadre of people, especially young people and talented people, self-educating themselves on radio technology, yet to date, the US government just ignores the fact that they're there, and they're learning, and they're doing really innovative things, and no one in the government is tapping into that incredible resource.
Great point. I will definitely keep that in mind. I will say one of the things that we started working towards is integration with the National Guard. So we've been working with the Michigan Air National Guard and teaching them how to become users of these 5G technologies and starting to teach them about how to use different signaling devices, concepts. And what I liked about the National Guard is it's about 500,000 people in the National Guard across the entire United States, and they come from all walks of life. And a lot of them actually are amateur radio operators. So they're pulling that knowledge into their training, their different combat or their communication squadrons from there. We're bringing them in from industry. And then the kind of like virtual circle of this is as they're getting trained, they're going to go pop back out, more interested in this technology, bring it into their industry, teach them to become engineers and practitioners of this. So we're pulling that in, but it hasn't been a stated objective to work with that community. But I appreciate the thought.
Hey Tom, thanks for the talk. I love what you've done with Okudu because it's both visionary and obvious, kind of. So I think we really need it. And I was wondering, was there anyone left out of someone? Was there anyone who lost, like someone who pushed back against this, like someone, I don't know, someone who owned like proprietary stacks or something? Was that a problem you had to deal with?
It was to an extent, but we kind of worked around that. So I gave a talk about kind of setting up for Okudu in the Brooklyn 6G Summit last year. And Peter Vetter, who's one of the co-CEOs of Bell Labs, was in the audience. And I've talked to Peter about this a number of times. And he came up to me after that talk and he said, I finally get it, what you're talking about here. Because even though Linux kind of took over from like the internet infrastructure, it didn't offset Windows. Or better yet, the metaphor that I think changed his mind on this, and it changed Ericsson's mind as well, because Ericsson was kind of like, you don't need to do this, we've got this covered, don't worry about it. I said, no, I think you're missing something here, because Ericsson would often complain they can't hire good engineers that know how to develop an Ericsson RAN stack. Well, of course not, because you've hidden all of it so much, you have to be in their world in order to have any knowledge about how to use this. So, for instance, the metaphor that I used at the Brooklyn 6G Summit was, think about Kubernetes. Google really funded and focused on getting Kubernetes out there as a way to run cloud infrastructure for the Google Cloud. Now, Amazon, AWS doesn't use Kubernetes in its core, but they're part of the Kubernetes Foundation. They love Kubernetes because as an open source project, it's teaching people how to become better cloud engineers. So that's where the pushback kind of stopped, as we realized this is part of the workforce development model of the office, is by being able to push this out there, it's going to train people to better understand how to run, execute, know how these networks work, and then when they pull them into the specialized stacks that Ericsson and Nokia run, they're going to be closer to having that expertise and that training for it. So those were the biggest kind of pushback. Some of it was also within the government, again, this whole fear, uncertainty, and doubt around open source technologies. A lot of it was surrounding this whole, how do we deal with our adversaries? And specifically, this is the China problem in the United States right now. Well, if it's open source, can't China just put in all sorts of backdoors? Well, no, not if you do it right. Not if you put all the code quality checks, management, structure, people who are dedicated to working with the industry to pull in the community to pull and monitor what's going into that code base. We can actually offset that risk and actually be better than a lot of proprietary stacks are for knowing what's in there and kind of that software bill of materials that we talk about. So those are kind of, I think, the two people that we, kind of industries that we get, places, I should say, that we got pushback from. But I think we've handled the conversation with them well, and there hasn't been a whole lot of negative, maybe not adoption, maybe not, full-on support for it, but at least kind of like all right, we understand why you're doing this for multiple reasons, and we'll at least, we won't get in your way, is what I got to with a lot of that.
So you talked a little bit about Akuda, and you've been a friend of GNU Radio for a long time. Does GNU Radio have a place in this vision for your, FutureG architecture?
Yeah. So one of the challenges here that I'll point out, even though I used to run GNU Radio, and so I used to help execute a GPL v3 code base, Okudu is going to be a BSD 3-clause licensed product, so that people who are innovating on different levels of the software that plug into it, such as if you're familiar with the ORAN concept, there's this RAN Intelligent Controller, or RIC. RIC is not part, and this is what's going to actually allow us to build apps that communicate and control the RAN stack from there. The RIC is not part of Okudu because we find that to be an area of commercial competition still. Whereas the CUD, we don't find that to be commercially competitive anymore, but we wanted to enable that. But you wouldn't be able to do that in light of a GPL-like license. So we had to make that calculus there. So having said that, what I mentioned with the slides on Okudu, what I'm looking for are the people who have the smart ideas, the people to both help us invent, test, experiment with novel waveforms, physical layers, approaches to managing data, approaches to managing spectrum that I think GNU Radio is actually ripe for, to actually prove out those kind of concepts as we can integrate them into, in the future, kind of translation them or translate them into Okudu. I think the other thing, though, is from that kind of observability of the spectrum and prosecution of information in the spectrum. I think that's where the GNU Radio tool set and framework and all the work that's been done on top of it has played a lot of roles in understanding how radio signals work in the real world. I'll harken back to our first GRCon in 2011 when Matt Edis gave his "Why doesn't my signal look like it does in the textbook?" lecture. And by pulling it out of the textbook and putting it into real-world execution and operation, that's what taught us a lot in this room, how we think about spectrum, how we think about signals, think about electronic warfare and attacks on our wireless networks. That's where I really see the GNU Radio crowd helping us out with and being part of the solution set to better understand how all this stuff kind of fuses together in the end. So hopefully that answers the question about the value of the community here.
You mentioned working with the big system providers like Ericsson to get them on board with including some of these capabilities. Do you also work at all with the big system operators like AT&T and Verizon, so they might include that in their requirements to pull on the demand side?
Yeah, we do. In fact, we're generating a new quarterly meeting with the CTOs of all of the mobile network operators. So we have good working relationships with the big MNOs in the country, actually somewhere around the world. So yes, we are absolutely working with them to kind of prepare them and make sure that we're hearing from them what their interests are. And simultaneously also trying to get them to break some of their dependency on what we call ARPU, or average revenue per user. They own the contract with you as a user, and what we found in 5G was they couldn't drive more revenue from you. None of us would be willing to pay a higher bill per month to get 5G when 4G was working just fine for us. 5G does have some special things that you don't necessarily notice and aren't necessarily part of your daily lives, but they couldn't drive revenue better with 5G. So they want new ideas, they want new market spaces to get into. Back to why Isaac is excited for them, is that maybe another way of generating revenue by selling that data or selling access to that data or computing functions on that and then selling products, right? There's a whole lot of ideas there. So we are working closely with them to kind of to help understand what their challenges are, provide them with opportunities to work with us. We actually think that as well as that, we're also working with them on this infrastructure play. So if we're going to invest in the infrastructure around the United States for critical infrastructure defense, as part of our Isaac strategy, we're going to need to make sure we're working with them closely on utilizing their networks. And so we have that relationship with them as well. And Isaac, as a concept, I think will blossom under a concept of Okudu. So we're making sure that they're informed and part of that whole process. So yeah, absolutely, in pretty much all ways, we're engaging the US MNOs on our plans.
I think we have time for one more quick question.
Yeah, hi. I think that it's one word is missing in your Isaac, it's effectors. And the question is that are you guys looking at the Ukraine conflict? Are you learning lessons? Like, do you have any feedback? Like anything?
Yes, we absolutely are. It's difficult to, from a Defense Department perspective, to necessarily translate those, because a lot of what we learn on the other side of the fence, and how do we actually leverage that. But I think the open source reporting that we're seeing, and that is a critical driver for why these types of things are important, comes into play. I look at, you're probably familiar with Skyfortress, which is the use of Android phones from an acoustic sensing perspective. Using that as a model for how can you utilize inexpensive commercial technologies to provide better sensing networks for missile defense and early warning systems. So yeah, I pay close attention to what's happening on the front lines out there, pull that back into our thinking on this. But good point, that has taught us, it's not only taught us a lot, and I worked, not getting too many war stories here, I worked very closely with the Ukrainians prior to the war kicking off to kind of help prep some of these ideas out there. So it was very important to me to pay attention to that and to support the work out there. It's been more important as a way of, as it has educated other people in the US government on the value of these technologies. When they see that the Ukrainian soldiers are not using their tactical radios, because the tactical radio is so specific that, again, it just becomes a target, but utilizing these technologies instead. Another kind of eye-opener for a lot of people was Operation Spider's Web. This is when the internal to Russian deployment of Connex boxes full of drones that were then controlled over cellular infrastructure. People kind of woke up and said, whoa, they can do that? So now when you're thinking about the national defense posture of the United States borders, and as you've heard, President Trump and the Golden Dome concept, everybody thought it was just going to be the perimeter protection, and that taught us that you can't just think about this from a perimeter protection perspective. This is a countrywide challenge that we've got to adapt to, and you're not going to have those same big metal radars that are looking out of the U.S. constantly. We now have to figure out how to sustain and monitor and understand what's happening inside of our nation as well. And that was another big key driver. So yeah, those lessons learned are propagated through Washington quite well. So thank you. All right. Again, thank you very much for your time.
So we are going to continue with the main track here. If Michael Aldrich could come on over to the AV table, that'd be great, and we'll get started with the main track here in just a couple minutes. So up next, we're going to have Dan Boshin, who's going to talk with us about, was it 5G, shaking up 5G? So I misspoke earlier. We are not going to break right now. We're going to continue with the main track with Dan. Are we ready for him? Okay. So Dan, you're up.
We're up, all right. Hello everyone, can you hear me okay? So excited to be here. This is my second GNU radio conference. And I'm here I work for Microchip in Beverly, Massachusetts as part of our frequency and time system. So I work on atomic clocks and precision frequency sources. And this Shaking Up 5G, it's a presentation I put together with my colleague Dave Chandler, who's our senior manager of our product marketing group. And Dave likes to greet me with semi-random, tough questions periodically. And so one day he came in and said, "Hey, Dan, what do you think would happen if we subjected our oscillators to the vibration profiles of a Falcon rocket or an F-35 fighter jet? What would happen to 5G communications in terms of that vibration?" And that's what ended up being this presentation you see here. So what we're going to go through, I'm going to briefly explain quadrature amplitude modulation, which most of you are probably familiar with, as well as OFDM. I'll give the 5-minute version of that. And then we'll go into G sensitivity, vibration effects on oscillators to touch on that. And then the practical implementation of a 5G NR signal up at 6 gigahertz. And in particular, the phase carrier tracking. That's what we'll be thinking about in terms of the effect of the phase noise and its impact on the error vector magnitude, or the signal quality for that waveform. So first, QAM. So with QAM, we have an IQ baseband in phase in quadrature that's up-converted to some RF or IF passband. And the level of the I and Q, the level of the I and Q is what's going to set the magnitude and phase of that carrier for each of possible M signals that we could be transmitting at any given time. So I'm showing their QPSK where M is 4. So we're transmitting 2 possible bits. You see the 4 possible symbols we could do. Or 16 QAM where we increase it to 16 possible levels. And so those points are indicating the magnitude and phase that we could transmit in any given time interval that I show as A and theta there. So we can keep increasing. We can go up to 8 bits per symbol and be at 256 QAM, or 1024 QAM, 1K QAM at 10 bits per symbol. And in all of those, that symbol duration, that time we send one symbol, that's what's going to set the RF bandwidth. So the RF bandwidth of the waveform is 1 over T for all those cases, so that's how we're squeezing in more data by just increasing that constellation more and more. So when we want to send broadband data, this is where OFDM comes in. So the challenge, if we decided to just use one symbol and increase that symbol rate to get the high data rate, is multipath fading. So that's going to be a dominant challenge where the delay spread, as we go through a channel, how much time the portions of the symbol receive before others due to multipath, if that spread exceeds the symbol duration, then that's frequency selective fading. That's very challenging to equalize and deal with. And so the solution here, a big reason for OFDM, is we can send many smaller narrow band QAM carriers all in parallel. So we're slowing down the symbol rate of each one, sending them all in parallel, and now we get OFDM. And that's what this is showing in the simplest case, where it's just a bunch of those same QAM modulations all in parallel, summed together, each at a separate, slightly separate offset frequency. But we slow down the data rate for each one of those to send a high data rate so that that time duration exceeds the delay spread, and we have flat fading, very easy to equalize. So if you took the FFT of that summation, you would see that that is exactly, each bin in the FFT is one of those subcarriers. So very nice, it's very easy to implement. We can actually stuff the data into the FFT, take the inverse FFT, that's the waveform we transmit. So the challenge with this, the challenge that we do get with this much slower symbol rate, is ultimately phase noise. That's what we're going to be talking about. So it has a tighter phase noise requirement. So a quick diagram here showing going from I to Q to digitally up-convert it. Maybe we have a D to A after that. That D to A can be anywhere in the system. I show it there at the IF. And then there's a local oscillator and a transmitter up at the microwave frequency that then gets to our transmitted signal up at RF. And the same thing on a receive, it comes back, there's a receiver local oscillator, there's a A to D clock, and we get back to IQ baseband. So ideally, we're transmitting the baseband IQ signals on the transmitter, and we eventually get back to the same ones on the receiver, but we introduce phase noise. So the common locations where phase noise is introduced is in the clock that's running the D to A and A to D converter, or those local oscillators. The local oscillators, the microwave local oscillator is going to be the dominant one. That's the one we're going to look at closer today. And resulting in, you can see the smearing of the constellation, right? In terms of radial smearing is the key sign that we have a phase noise, an issue due to phase noise. And that leads to, if that smearing that we see crosses these bit boundaries where the constellations, where we're trying to decide between the constellations, that leads to bit errors, and we quantify that with error vector magnitude. So as far as the frequency sources, the local oscillator, I showed you, it's a combination of a lower frequency crystal oscillator and a microwave synthesizer, and that crystal oscillator is typically some sort of a resonator, piezoelectric or electrostatic, and in all those cases there's a translation of mechanical energy, vibration, to the electrical energy in the oscillator. And that close-in phase noise that results, that's dominated by the Q of that resonator. I'm showing a phase noise profile, and we have phase noise versus frequency offset, so there's low frequency phase noise components and high frequency phase noise components. That's what that's all showing. So once we vibrate it, if we vibrate it, then those additional vibration modes, they end up translating to increases in phase noise at those vibration frequencies. So that translation is given by gamma, which is a sensitivity to vibration for the oscillator. Different oscillators will have different coupling sensitivities as defined by that gamma. And that's given in ppb per Gs. ppb is a fractional frequency, parts per billion, per Gs of acceleration. And this is just showing the formula, how we could take that gamma if we had it and figure out what the phase noise result is. So we're going to be dealing with two different oscillators that have two different gamma sensitivities. One that's 1 ppb per G, and then another oscillator that's 0.1 ppb per G, and see the effects on phase noise. Here it's showing where the 0.1 ppg is smaller, and there's a slight increase in phase noise. And then the inferior oscillator that's at 1 ppb per G, the phase noise is increasing significantly. So as far as the profiles, so and Dave gathered all these up to give me the naval surface vessel profile, a road vehicle profile, and you can see the different gamma sensitivity. So this is the sensitivity of the vibration level specifically that would be applied for these different conditions, or that it needs to meet. Commercial airliner, then the Falcon rocket, and then F-15, I said F-35, an F-15 fighter jet profile. And so for each of these profiles are typically given out to 2 kilohertz, and we just extrapolated to include all the phase noise because we are sensitive to the higher frequency phase noise as well, which is what that's saying. So we don't include any isolation or resonance or higher level modes, it's specifically these. So if we take those profiles and we look at what it would do to the two different oscillators that we chose, so the 1 ppb oscillator would increase these, the profile would increase the phase noise according to these curves that are given. With the 0.1 ppb, it didn't even show up for the naval surface or road vehicle profile in terms of going up. So it's some level below these that are shown, and that's why there's that question mark. So taking these different profiles, so we have the vibration profile, the vibration that you're applying, the resulting phase noise of the crystal oscillator is what's shown on the second line. And then what we did is I used this chip, this analog devices chip, ADRV 9009 transceiver, very nice chip that works out to the 6 gigahertz we're working with, and determined the phase noise that would result from using our crystal oscillator with that transceiver chip. And this is the phase noise that's given from the data sheet for that transceiver. And it consists of these, this phase noise, this is of the microwave synthesizer. So far out here is the VCO phase noise component, and then this flat part is the other phase noise components within the PLL chip. And then at the low end here, way here, is what the crystal oscillator would dominate. That's where you start to see that come in, and the 1/f noise of the synthesizer chip. So that's what we're seeing, is how this phase noise, as it exists without vibration, how it increases, and what it would do to the OFDM system. So seeing that in a time domain, so that same phase noise profile in a time domain, this is what it would be statically. This is phase versus time. And then under the F15 profile, the profile of the F15 with the standard oscillator, that 1 ppb per G, this is what that phase is now doing versus time. Right, so you can picture phase varying versus time. And then with carrier tracking, so and this is with all comm systems, whether it was single carrier QAM or as we'll see with OFDM, the idea of having a receiver tracking that carrier to recover the carrier recovery measures the phase and corrects for it for phase variations. And so it is taking these phase errors at each point in time and moving it back to 0 essentially. So you're seeing the two cases of what happens, how much of this gets through. See, there's still noise that gets through, it's just the offset's been removed. How much of that gets through comes down to your carrier tracking bandwidth and those types of considerations. So the question is, what would this look like to OFDM and specifically 5G NR? And then the main thing with 5G in terms of tracking phase, and what I'm showing here is this is one slot. So you're seeing on this axis, you're seeing all the OFDM subcarriers. So if you picture my first plot that showed all these QAM carriers in parallel, that's what's going on here, except there's thousands of them. Right? So there's thousands of QAM subcarriers. That's in frequency, and then moving forward in time is our symbol by symbol change. So each one of those changing with each symbol, that's that T I first gave as the symbol rate. And this is one slot, and OFDM, it's a subframe, which is also a slot for certain numerologies, and it's 14 OFDM symbols. So we put 14 OFDM symbols in exactly 1 millisecond. That's one slot. And then within that, we can put pilots. So we put pilots, reference signals, that we know what was transmitted. We can evaluate where its phase is when we receive it. We can use that to correct all the other subcarriers and all the other symbols, and we have a certain rate of increasing the pilots. So what you're seeing here is 2 pilots per slot. That's typically used. It's either 1 or 2, typically with 5G. So this would be with the more aggressive update rate, which would be attractive for higher phase noise. So looking at that, just to conceptualize it, this is showing that uncorrected phase noise as we move forward with time. And here on the left is showing you the constellation for 7. I picked half of one of those slots in one of these more benign areas here, right? And all these OFDM subcarriers are demodulated to their constellation. This was 16 QAM specifically. You can see the rotation, which is this phase error right here, about 40 degrees. It's rotated 40 degrees. And all of them superimposed, so you can see what it's doing. You also have these areas where the phase is changing more aggressively, and you would see that more spread out. So that's both the major rotation, which is this this common phase error to all of them, and then the noise within that noise, once we remove that common phase error, would be the EVM, error vector magnitude. So this shows it corrected. So here is with the correction approach, and you can have different methodologies of how you're doing the correction, and they will have a big impact to the EVM that you result. This is a methodology which was zero latency, which means you don't have the luxury, and just to show you what you're seeing here, each one of those is a slot, and within the slot there's the location of the pilots, and we're varying forward in time, right? So wherever there's a pilot, we're able to measure the phase. Whatever the average is of the phase for the pilot, we'll remove it from every other subcarrier. It's common to all the subcarriers, and snap that phase back, and that's exactly what you're seeing. This phase was an error, we snap it back to 0. We apply it to future OFDM symbols because it's zero latency. In this case, we don't have the luxury of applying it to what's already happened. We already wanted to demodulate it and pass that data. So it's applied to the future symbols as they drift, snap, and that's what you're seeing. So that tracking process is a high-pass filter. Carrier tracking in general is a high-pass filter to phase noise. You can apply that concept to every comm system. Here it's applied to OFDM. So we're seeing to the phase noise, by doing that track and remove, figure out what it is and subtract it, it's this high-pass process. The faster we track, then the higher the corner frequency is of that high-pass filter. It's a high-pass filter to the phase noise. Right? So if we're only tracking once per slot, that's tracking at a 1 kilohertz rate, versus twice per slot at a 2 kilohertz rate, and you're seeing the two curves that would result in terms of its effective filter. So that said, here's the impact of the carrier phase tracking on the microwave phase noise. So at this point, I generated microwave phase noise from the oscillators. I showed their effect under different vibration conditions, right? And apply that high-pass filter, and you can see it is whether it was the 1 kilohertz or 2 kilohertz tracking, it has different cutoffs and different rates in terms of what the resulting phase noise is. So it's reducing the energy at the low frequencies. It's passing through the energy at the higher frequencies. There's actually a slight increase in the way it's taking measured noise and adding it back into the future symbols. It's adding a little noise there where it's not correlated. So that's all factored in. This is the end result. So what that does, OFDM is basically a food processor to phase noise, okay? So it's pretty simple with a single carrier QAM of everything I'm describing. Now you have one subcarrier that we're concerned with, and then you have another one right next to it, right? So the one subcarrier, these were 15 kilohertz subcarriers. So just imagine the QAM, the single carrier QAM introduced being 15 kilohertz wide. Now this phase noise is going well beyond 15 kilohertz. So out to 15 kilohertz, which is this area here, it's a log scale, so you're getting a lot compressed at the high end. This is all the phase noise in this region that's right on your subcarrier. Right? And so that ends up being common phase error. It's going to be common to every subcarrier within that OFDM symbol will see the same effect. They're all multiplied by the same LO. This multiplying time, convolve in frequency, it gets all the same phase noise on every subcarrier. So it's common to all the subcarriers. The phase noise out here is what's going to spill over into the subcarrier next to you. Right? So it's in the next frequency bin. So this goes in the next frequency bin, this one's into the next. So that's basically why I say it's a food processor, because what you end up seeing is you're going to see your common phase error that got directly introduced, and you're going to see these tails of every other subcarrier going out for the 1,000 bins that are next to you. What's convenient is that ends up being you're just getting one slice from every other subcarrier of a different portion of the phase noise. So this is a good takeaway. You can just integrate this total phase noise power, and that will be the total energy that's going to be in your symbol or carrier, subcarrier of interest. So we've already removed the common phase error, that was the high pass. The integration of all this is all the noise that's going to be folded in, if you will, or spilled in from the other intercarrier interference from the other carriers. And so if you integrate that total energy, that will give you the EVM. And so that's what I did here. It's showing with the low G crystal, with the 2 kilohertz tracking versus the 1 kilohertz tracking. You see the difference there? It's just adding in that little tiny bit of more energy and making that EVM increase slightly. But it's showing the same case if we go up to the inferior crystal with the 1 ppb per G and what it will do to the EVM under those two cases of tracking. And then for comparison, here's the static case where it's just the baseline noise for that crystal, the phase noise of that crystal we picked combined with that microwave oscillator. So this is showing, so what I did was I did a simulation of the OFDM waveform with the phase noise, an accurate creation of the time domain phase noise, applied it to the OFDM symbols, and then I did the prediction, which is that integration I described, just to see how well it matches up. And it matches up very closely. There's more variation here at the higher levels also because it's noisier, so you have noise in the noise of your estimates too, but still very close in all regards. So it's just saying, okay, we got it right in terms of the factors we used and how we did that prediction in terms of that. And even the idea of that you can just integrate it's as easy as integrating the one phase noise profile. So here shows just to take that up to 1K QAM with a 5G NR waveform at 6 gigahertz, 15 kilohertz subcarrier spacing. So that's all the same as the prior slides. And the requirement, just to understand the requirement from the specs for EVM, it's for 256 QAM, it's 3.5% EVM, error vector magnitude. The RMS of all the errors of those deviations you're seeing on the constellation. And then for 1024 QAM, it's 2.5%. And so with the just the straight no vibration case, that EVM was 1.5%. And this is what the constellation would look like at 1024 QAM, and that's the phase tracking versus time. So you're seeing the two together. If you took that up with the 1 ppg per G oscillator, 23% EVM, that's what that looks like for 1024 QAM. So it's a little difficult to demodulate, I think. And then finally, this is showing in summary what this looks like for all those cases. So this is with the standard G 1 ppb per G oscillator in terms of the EVM we get for each of those profiles that we're subjected it to, and then if with the low G, the 0.1 per G, 0.1 ppb per G oscillator with all the same profiles, or that's where you're seeing that same 2.5% we showed earlier. So in summary, this showed the phase noise to vibration, and those vibration effects, they were most dominant in that range of 10 hertz to 2 kilohertz. That's why we showed what it would do with a 2.5 kilohertz or the 12.5 kilohertz subcarrier spacing. If you increase the subcarrier spacing, these effects get less and less, and you'll see that for the FR2, the above 6 gigahertz 5G specs have much wider subcarrier spacings to allow for that. And the low energy, we included a low energy past 2 kilohertz because it does still contribute, it does still have an effect. And the impact, and what you want to think about carefully, is the carrier tracking implementation with these effects. In terms of phase noise and carrier tracking, they go hand in hand, and that's not just for OFDM, that's for all all comm systems. And how here, too, it's just showing like how much do we need to worry about. Well, if you're not going to run your radio in a Falcon rocket, you don't have much to worry about even at the 1 ppb per G in terms of this, in this case. And showing how as we go into higher and higher orders of QAM, how this is going to be increasingly more challenging and something we'll be thinking more about. And this was only one source of EVM, so I didn't talk about the Doppler offsets you'd also experience in a Falcon rocket and its effects, for example, but it's a very dominant one that's considered in your RF radio design, as well as the sampling rates, sampling clocks of your A to D and D to A converters. So thank you.
To a microphone, it doesn't end up on the stream, and that is sad for all the people. Mute?
Oh, there we go. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I must have. All right, thank you. So I might have missed something, but you've demonstrated that with different G profiles, your sort of this figure that you've demonstrated would differ, I presume. So how do you sort of understand which kind of corrections to apply, which profile to apply to a receiver? Do you track like acceleration continuously, or is there some other approach to this, like in F15, for example?
How do you decide
how
many reference symbols to use, for example? Or?
Perhaps, yeah. Like, how do you understand which of those profiles to work with to correct the phase offsets?
Yeah. Well, so you'd say where is your receiver being used? What's the application? That would come from your specs and requirements, right? As far as the radio design, like, are you designing a radio that has to ride in a Falcon rocket or in a road vehicle, right?
Right, but like if you're building this for a truck, I presume those would be more or less consistent. But
yes.
If you're in F15, their G profiles can change over time.
These profiles were to spec limits. So they were given to you by, and I think I added where their sources are. So if you're designing for a certain application, and these would be given to you, so NASA TM 2002 or MIL Standard 883. So those weren't, like, we didn't go and measure a road vehicle and get that. That's saying that's the spec limit. You want to be able to work up to that limit. And then you would say, then you look at your other spec limits. This is the EVM your system needs to meet, and this is how you can connect those dots. So, yeah, thank you.
I've got another question.
Thank you, Dan. Quick question. So, from the measured phase noise, can we do it in the inverse way and actually estimate the vibration profiles?
From the measured phase noise, can you do the inverse?
Can we do the inverse and actually get the vibrational profiles?
The vibration profile from the inverse. Oh, that's interesting. So the if the phase noise was completely due to that, yes. So that would be, that's this formula right here. Right? So this formula is saying, okay, this vibration profile is given to you as a power spectral density. It's a power spectral density due to acceleration, right? And there's this gamma factor, that's how you convert it to a power spectral density due to phase noise. So it's really a one-to-one mapping, so you could go the other way as well if your phase noise was limited by the, so right here, as it is, right there, you can certainly go back to this because they're just one for one. You just change the y-axis with this formula. Make sense?
question.
Hi, thanks for your talk. Kind of piggybacking on his question, if
Sure.
you had sort of a wideband inertial measurement unit as well that could measure the vibration profile itself, would you theoretically be able to integrate that into your controller to do the phase tracking due to vibration?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So you can do vibration correction, right, in terms of that. And there's oscillators built that way that are using sensors of the vibration to correct the phase noise.
Okay. Would you theoretically be able to integrate that into one of the, like, the lower quality oscillator that had like the 1 ppb per G?
Yeah, they are. That's part of our oscillator designs that do that.
Okay.
Yeah, MEM sensors and things like that. Yeah, vibration, measure the vibration and feed it back into a control loop, and in terms of the bandwidth of that control loop to help improve the phase noise of the oscillator.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Good thinking.
So, are there any other questions? Okay, then let's speak then again. Let's thank the speaker again.
Thank you.
And Samantha's making hand signs. Why are you making the secret hand sign to shut up?
Just letting you know, we've shifted the schedule a bit, and we're now taking a break. There is food over in the other room. I double-checked it was there this time. So, yeah, and come back again after break at, when's break end? 11 o'clock. All right, thanks, folks.